Welcome to the Department of Energy's webinar for our Pathways to Commercial Liftoff. Today, we're going to be talking about advanced nuclear. I'm Vanessa Chan, the Chief Commercialization Officer and Director of the Office of Technology Transitions. The Liftoff Reports represent a department-wide initiative to strengthen engagement between the public and private sectors to accelerate commercialization and deployment of critical clean energy technologies. With Bill, IRA, and the CHIPS Act, we have $500 billion that most importantly, we need to use to activate the $23 trillion in the private sector. These reports that we've created are alive reports. They're designed to be regularly updated as we gather more input from industry and the commercialization outlook as each technology evolves. As everybody knows who's done commercialization, what we know now is not going to be what we need to know 6 months from now, a year from now. And that is why these reports are going to be constantly updated. We began with 4 technology areas: advanced nuclear, clean hydrogen, long duration energy storage, and carbon management. These reports were published in the last few weeks and are all available at liftoff.energy.gov. Further webinars covering LDES, carbon management, and other future liftoff technologies will follow over the next weeks and months. So please continue to go to liftoff.energy.gov to download these. Today, for a virtual side chat, which we'll be doing on advanced nuclear, we have joining us Dr. Katie Huff, Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Energy, David Crane, the Director of the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, Jigar Shah, Director of the Loan Programs Office. Following that panel, we will have Julie Kozaraki, the Senior Advisor in the Loans Program Office and lead for the Advanced Nuclear Liftoff Report, who will provide a deep dive on insights from the report. So I want to start off with a couple of questions on our fireside chat. And Katie, the first one is to you. One key question the report tries to answer is, what would it take to get to 200 gigawatts of new nuclear in the US by 2050? Could you talk us through what it means to get to 200 gigawatts?
Yeah, we currently have about 95 gigawatts of nuclear capacity online and operating in the United States. Getting to 200 new gigawatts would mean tripling that capacity. So to meet that ambitious number, we're going to need multiple reactor technologies to be successfully deployed at scale, from generation 3 light water reactors to generation 4 advanced reactors, as well as a number of reactors of all sizes, from 1 megawatt microreactors all the way up to gigawatt plus reactors. And each of these technologies have a different role to play in meeting our decarbonization goals, from traditional utility scale electricity generation to industry heating for process heat. And small modular reactors can provide more certainty of hitting a predicted cost target and are likely to play a more important role in the early scale up of nuclear power. As we think about scaling in the industry to add another 200 gigawatts of new nuclear capacity, it's going to potentially require gigawatt scale nuclear reactors as well. So the first step in getting to a committed order book of signed contracts for new reactors is that, and that's going to be the first step to making sure that 5 to 10 orders for each design is in that order book. So next, we'll have to deliver those projects on time and on budget, right? Getting this right is going to present an enormous opportunity for American industrialization, deploying clean energy, building out domestic supply chains, and creating over 300,000 high-paying jobs.
We're so lucky to have you leading the helm at nuclear energy, really making sure that we're driving this forward with all these different technologies. Right now, the DOE looks completely different than it did when we first joined a little bit over 2 years ago. And one of those new things that we have an Undersecretary for Infrastructure, and with it, a new office called the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations that's led by David Crane. So David, can you talk a little bit about how OSET is playing a role in demonstrating advanced nuclear technologies?
Well, thank you, Vanessa, and thank everyone who's listening in or watching for joining us as we kick off these liftoff reports, which are really important documents and reflect our thinking and hopefully a lot of your thinking. Just as you say, Vanessa, a little bit of background, because Dr. Huff with the Office of Nuclear Energy and Jigar with the Loan Program Office been around a little longer. Office of Clean Energy Demonstration was set up by the bipartisan infrastructure law. We're a year old. I tell my friends in the private sector, you should think of us as sort of the equity arm of, or one of the bigger equity arms of the Department of Energy, enabled by this new legislation. The difference from our equity, from true equity, is we require no return on capital and no return of capital. In the Office of Clean Energy Demonstration, we have $26 billion. It's a multi-technology platform. Included within that is $3.2 billion for the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program. This is a little different program for us because most of our other technology-driven programs are still in the bid solicitation mode. In the ARDP program, the two projects were already selected by Dr. Huff's office, and we're proud to have them in the Office of Nuclear Energy now. There's the TerraPower project and the X Energy demonstration projects. Both of them are seeking to deploy first-of-a-kind Generation 4 commercial scale reactors and also building fuel fabrication facilities at the same time. So, we're working closely with the sponsors of those projects to make them a success. The technology that's being demonstrated there is absolutely essential. But even with these Gen 4s, and there's a lot of synergies between Gen 4s and the Gen 3 pluses. And so we're going to work closely with the Loan Program Office and with the Office of Nuclear Energy to do everything we can to help commercialize new nuclear, not just Gen 4, but Gen 3 plus, because there is a lot of connections between the two. So looking forward to moving this forward.
So rounding out our dream team here, we have Jigar Shah, who probably needs no introduction. We all just kind of surf off of his following to make sure these things get advertised. But Jigar, a common question we heard during stakeholder interviews was, do we even need new nuclear for net zero when renewables are so cheap?
Yes, of course we do. We need about 200 gigawatts in the US by 2050. When you look at multiple power system models for decarbonization scenarios, we need a substantial amount of new clean firm capacity. And our analysis estimates it's on the order of 500 to 800 gigawatts, or roughly 20 to 40% of the new expanded electricity grid with all of these electric vehicles and heat pumps that we're adding. Clean firm power refers to generation sources that can provide stable energy supply during all seasons and during periods of weeks up to months. There are very few other sources of clean firm power like geothermal, hydropower, or renewables paired with long duration energy storage or natural gas with carbon capture. So nuclear looks well positioned to provide around 200 gigawatts of the overall 500 to 800 gigawatts that we're going to need. Also, new nuclear has a clear value proposition as a clean, firm power source to complement renewables. The renewables build out on the path toward decarbonization goals. And note that I said complement renewables, not compete. Deploying clean, firm power sources like nuclear will enable the increased deployment of renewable power. In addition to providing clean, firm power, nuclear also uses land efficiently, has lower transmission requirements so they can site themselves on existing coal plant sites than distributed or site-constrained generation sources, and can leverage existing transmission infrastructure as fossil assets are retired.
So Dr. Huff is one of the experts in the world on nuclear. And one of my favorite pictures of her is like writing these like complicated equations. So I'm going to ask her a question, and she has promised not to do any equations in the answer. But Katie, could you talk about what we mean by coal to nuclear and the role it would play in supporting the energy transition?
Thanks so much for that. Between 2023 and 2050, about 200 electric gigawatts of unabated coal assets are expected to retire. As utilities begin to retire these fossil assets, nuclear energy is uniquely positioned to replace those retiring assets with a similar electricity generation profile. This is because nuclear power is just a cleaner way to boil water, right? In a coal plant, coal is burned to create steam and spin a turbine to generate hundreds of megawatts of electricity. This results in a variety of emissions, including carbon dioxide. Meanwhile, nuclear energy splits atoms to create energy, which creates steam, which spins a turbine, which creates electricity, and doesn't emit CO2. So a DOE study in 2022 found that nearly 400 existing and retired coal plant sites are suitable to host an advanced nuclear power plant. Leveraging the same transmission infrastructure as those retiring fossil generation sites can yield $100 million in savings for a new plant like that. Idaho National Lab estimated that over an additional overnight capital cost savings from that coal to nuclear conversion could range from 15% to 35%. And nuclear power has the highest economic impact of any power generation source in the vicinity of where those plants are built. So they can have a real benefit to the local community. Nuclear power is also one of the few generation sources that can preserve the volume of high-paying jobs from those retiring coal plants. A lot of the same people who maintain turbines and steam boilers and electricity around the plant can be rehired, and some of them don't even need to be retrained to be leveraged in a nuclear power plant. So, now's the time to move ahead because without advanced nuclear construction and deployment to meet our climate goals and help provide good paying jobs, especially in the skilled trades, we aren't going to be able to bring those communities along with us. So we must make sure that we're meeting those climate goals and bringing folks along with us in that transition so that folks aren't left behind.
I love that. And, David had mentioned that LPO has been around for a little while, and that's the department that Jigger leads. But Jigger, you've really kind of revamped it and given it new life and in a way made it lift off. So could you explain LPO's authorities and how they could support new nuclear, particularly coal to nuclear?
Thanks. Yeah, the Loan Programs Office was originally designed with nuclear in mind. And the Loan Programs Office expects to take a leading role in financing the deployment of new nuclear. We have a new authority, in addition to our Innovative Clean Energy Authority, where we're funding the Vogtle nuclear plant. We have a new one called Section 1706, which is the Energy Infrastructure Reinvestment Program, which was created by the Inflation Reduction Act and provides LPO with up to $250 billion in lending authority. The 1706 program can be used to finance coal to nuclear plant conversions exactly like Katie described. The clean energy transition will be private sector led and government enabled. So we're excited to receive applications in areas that industry finds most compelling. In this case, mostly from electric utility companies. Funds for 1706 projects have to be conditionally committed by September of 2026. So there's no time to waste in getting those applications in. In addition to nuclear construction, LPO can finance manufacturing across the nuclear supply chain for components and fuel supply, including conversion, enrichment, and fabrication.
So anyone who knows our fearless leader, Secretary Granholm, knows that she is someone who really wants to move fast and get things done. And one of her favorite phrases is deploy, deploy, deploy. So David, could you talk about the implications for deployment timelines and what milestones are critical for meeting our decarbonization goals?
Sure, Vanessa, I could do that. And just to bring this back to the liftoff reports that we're all here to talk about, and again, would encourage everyone to read the entire liftoff report, not just count on us. One thing about these liftoff reports is that they're sort of anticipating the future. So reasonable people can differ on some aspects of it. And if you differ with what's in the report, we want you to tell us. But when I read the report, the thing that to me is most compelling and is virtually indisputable, and it gets to the goal that Jigger talked about, that we need 200 gigawatts of new nuclear to go zero carbon by 2050 in this country, is that if we start to do that in 2035, if we don't start till then, that it's virtually impossible. So given the lead time that's associated with nuclear, we need to be moving now. And while we're moving forward on these Gen 4 projects, I think that means that we need to be moving also on a new wave of Gen 3 or Gen 3 plus reactors. And in that regard, another thing that the Liftoff report, I think, makes very clear is the need for a consortium approach to get the cost to where it needs to be. We need to get 5 to 10 of a particular design so that what happens now doesn't happen what happened in the past, where first of a kind became one of a kind. We need first of a kind to become many of a kind. So that's what we're committed to, work with industry on, if we could get an order book going for a new wave of nuclear reactors by 2025, then I think we'll be on our way. And, I always, I feel like my goal at the DOE is to be on calls with Jigger. And every time he says that this will be private sector led, and government enabled or DOE enabled. I agree with that, but I try and add the word accelerated. So it's going to be private sector led, DOE enabled and accelerated. So that's what we're trying to do in the nuclear world.
I love it. We got to go from FOAC to MOAC. We can trademark the MOAC. So Jigger, Vogtle just connected to the grid a few weeks ago with support from a $12 billion loan guarantee from LPO. What lessons do you think are most important for folks to take away?
No one is more excited than the Loan Programs Office that Vogtle Units 3 and 4 will be providing over 2,200 megawatts of clean, firm power for decades to come. It took a tremendous amount of perseverance and grit by the team at Southern Nuclear to get that across to operation. The team at Vogtle ran through walls, and there are a number of lessons that we need to share. We review this in the report, and the key lessons from Vogtle show us that nuclear construction issues are avoidable with rigorous planning, from ensuring designs are relatively complete before construction to investing heavily in pre-construction planning like detailed resource-loaded schedules. The next few years will require a critical trust-building exercise for the nuclear industry. It will be essential to prove why new builds will be different, delivered reasonably on time and on budget. For instance, Ontario Power Authority recently signed a commercial contract to build the GE Hitachi BWRX 300 at Darlington. GE, OPG, the Tennessee Valley Authority, and Synthos recently announced a $400 million investment to following Vogtle's best practices and finalizing the design, showing a serious commitment. OPG also announced they're pursuing an integrated project delivery model, an updated approach to sharing risk across partners that many electric utility companies in the United States are watching closely to see if they can replicate. It'll be crucial to analyze and explain to investors and the public how new risk-sharing models like these could ensure new nuclear construction is delivered on time and on budget.
That's excellent. So it's really kind of like when you're building your house, right? You want to have really good plans, right? And before you go after it, we're just doing it at a much larger scale with really cool technologies. So now you can see why this is the dream team. As a chief commercialization officer at DOE, I'm very focused on the research development, demonstration, deployment continuum. With Dr. Huff, we have R&D. With David Crane, we've got demonstration. With Jigger Shaw, we've got deployment. And so the dream team with RD&D continuum is here. These liftoff reports have been quarterbacked by OTT, OSED, and LPO, and all are done in deep partnership with groups within DOE who are the experts in these technologies. In the case of Advanced Nuclear, Dr. Katie Huff, who is leading NE, and others across the DOE complex, such as many of our national labs, have been really key authors and on these reports to make sure we're bringing the best to you. And as David said, we need to hear from the private sector. We have been spending a lot of time with many of you to get your input. And since these are living reports, we need you to continuously tell us what you think we got right, tell us what you think we need to modify, and we will do it because these are living reports. So if you haven't heard it enough, you need to go to liftoff.energy.gov to download the first 4 reports, including Advanced Nuclear. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to our lead author, Julie, who knows everything there to know about Advanced Nuclear. So over to you, Julie.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. And thank you, Jigger, Katie, and David for that overview. So hi, folks. I'm Julie Kozaracki. I am a senior advisor in the Loan Programs Office, and we started this work to answer 3 key questions. First, what is advanced nuclear and its value proposition? Second, do we even need new nuclear for net zero when we have all these cheap renewables? And third, why will it be different this time, or why won't it look like Vogtle? So in the next slide, to set the stage, when we're talking about advanced nuclear, we're talking about fission technologies, not fusion. But this includes reactors of all sizes, from 1 megawatt microreactors all the way up to gigawatt scale utility reactors, as well as small modular reactors, or SMRs, many of which are around 300 megawatts. Gen 3 Plus are light water reactors, like the ones that we've been operating for decades, while Gen 4 reactors use coolants like sodium or molten salt or helium, and many of them require HALEU, or high-assay, low-enriched uranium, for fuel. Note that SMRs may sound fancy, but they've been proven at scale. The US Navy has been using light water SMRs to power our entire submarine fleet since 1954. So on the next page, to answer the second question about whether we need new nuclear for net zero, the answer is yes. likely on the order of 200 gigawatts of new nuclear by 2050. Because in any decarbonization scenario, whether you build a ton of renewables or whether you build an insane amount of renewables, 20 to 40% of your grid is going to have to be clean, firm power. And of all that clean, firm power, nuclear looks to be a really good option for 1 to 200 gigawatts of that. And note that on the right-hand side, in the second scenario, if you try to do it with mostly renewables, you end up having to way overbuild the capacity to make up for the intermittency, which brings its own costs. So on the next page, as Jigar mentioned, to deeply decarbonize the grid, you simply don't have that many options. And in addition to being clean, firm power, nuclear also uses land really efficiently, requires a lot less transmission build out than other sources. And the only thing harder to build than a new nuclear power plant is transmission. And a lot of folks often underappreciate just how much land and transmission are going to be required for an effective renewables build out at scale. Nuclear is also one of very few technologies that can help keep the 200 plus high-paying jobs and tax base for coal communities that are going to be most impacted by the energy transition. So on the next page, it's important to note that nuclear is likely much more in the money than people realize. Almost every time Jigar posts about nuclear on Twitter or LinkedIn, the comments are filled with something to the effect of, why are we wasting time and money on nuclear? Don't you know solar is going to be $2 a megawatt hour? But the fact is, it doesn't matter if nuclear is never as cheap as solar because of the value that it's providing for a resilient, decarbonized grid. As a clean, firm resource, nuclear doesn't need to compete with solar by itself or with natural gas by itself. It needs to compete with solar with really long duration energy storage or natural gas with carbon capture. So this chart shows the estimated LCOE, or levelized cost of electricity, for those three sources, where we would expect to see the cost come down, moving right to left over time. But note that although we're really excited about long duration energy storage and carbon capture, the focus of two of our other Liftoff reports, both of those need to prove their technology at scale, as well as come down the cost curve. While nuclear needs to come down the cost curve, but the technology has been demonstrated and deployed at scale since the 1950s. So on the next page, it's important to note that right now we are entering what I'll call a bit of a hype cycle. Fortunately, the conversation has changed for the positive around nuclear, especially since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But the nuclear industry is locked in a stalemate where everyone is staring at each other, customers, suppliers, reactor designers. And there's only one signed commercial contract for new nuclear in North America, and it's not even in the US. It's in Canada with Ontario Power and GE Hitachi to build the BWRX 300 at Darlington. One important output of this work was that DOE has huge, terrific demonstration programs. The ARDP that David mentioned, the Carbon Free Power Project, which is managed in the Office of Nuclear Energy, and we're really excited about those. But this work reflected that they're not sufficient for getting us on our path to decarbonization. They have not yet unlocked a commercial wave of deployments. Because it turns out that if you're solving for nearest term deployment, as David mentioned, Gen 3 plus light water SMRs may need to come first because US utilities are very risk averse. And when we say that we need a committed order book for those reactors, we're saying that we need signed contracts, not press releases, not MOUs, and not letters of intent, because you can't finance a supply chain with MOUs, and you can't provide what you need to build out the workforce on the order of 300,000 to 400,000 workers to support this deployment. So a critical mass of 5 to 10 orders by design is really critical for building out the supply chain efficiently and for getting enough at-bats to come down the learning curve. You can't have onesie-twosies for each design. It's really critical that you have enough orders for each design. But as Dr. Huff mentioned, it's critical that we have multiple designs succeed at scale. It's just that you need a critical mass around each of those designs. And once we get that right, we have to deliver those first projects on time and on budget. And if we get that right, this is an enormous opportunity for American industrialization, deploying clean energy, establishing domestic manufacturing, establishing export pipeline, and creating hundreds of thousands of high-paying clean energy jobs. But on the next page, I'll note that the arithmetic to 200 gigawatts by 2050 is intimidating, and we've got to get going. A lot of decarbonization modeling drops in 300-400 gigawatts of nuclear in 2049, when you run out of other options, but that doesn't account for the lead times. And right now, every utility recognizes that they need new nuclear, they need clean, firm power, but they want to wait for someone else to go first, second, third, and they'll order reactor number 4 or reactor number 5. But that's not good enough, because if they all wait for the demo projects to be done, it's going to be too late and we're going to miss the boat. We need signed contracts now and timing to stagger out those first orders, because it's simply not going to work if utilities all place their orders at the same time, because we won't have the supply chain to deliver them those reactors. And we've done it before. We built massive amounts of new nuclear in the 1970s. And as Katie mentioned, it's likely that to meet these 200 gigawatt numbers, we may need big reactors again. It's really tough to beat those economies of scale. And we're going to need multiple designs to be successful. I may need a better term here eventually, but SMRs may be a bit of a gateway drug to get us back into the habit of building new nuclear in the US at scale again. So on the next page, the final question that I mentioned that we hear over and over again, and the key question that has been holding up new orders, is why won't this look like Vogtle again? So the report scratches the surface, but it's important to be transparent and specific about the lessons learned from Vogtle. And as Jigar mentioned, we are thrilled that we're going to have over 2,200 megawatts of clean, firm power for decades. But 15 billion shouldn't have become 35 billion. But it's really critical to note that when you look at the issues with nuclear construction, they're not nuclear-specific boondoggles. They're not issues with the nuclear island or something specific to nuclear. They're general mega project issues that you see with any mega project, from building bridges to Olympic stadiums. Because the AP1000 is a great technology. The design just wasn't complete enough before construction began, which created a cycle of rework. There also wasn't a detailed enough integrated project schedule or a fast enough turnaround on the QA. Something else important to note is that Vogtle required over 9,000 folks at peak for construction. And at a certain point, you end up hitting diseconomies of scale when you're managing a city's worth of people. So again, the report scratches the surface, but be sure to look out for further detailing of lessons learned from Vogtle and how we'll be avoiding those in new nuclear construction going forward. So on the next page, I think both Jigar and David mentioned that nuclear has a huge credibility problem to solve. And frankly, no one believes the new cost numbers. The first reactors are going to be expensive, and we should say that, but there's a clear path to that next set, the nth of a kind or many of a kind, being very economical, because there are true first of a kind costs around finalizing the design, sort of silly things you do in the first construction that you won't do again. So there's a really steep learning curve with a clear path to even units number 4, 5 being meaningfully less expensive than the first ones. And some developers may have overhyped the value of factory modularization, especially for some of the early build reactors, but there is real value in reducing the civil works construction. I just mentioned that Vogtle needed 9,000 people at peak for construction, and you're looking at estimates closer to, call it, 1,500 people to build a GE BWRX 300. So that makes managing that construction a huge driver of cost, much, much more manageable. And it is possible to do this right. South Korea has been churning out big reactors at 2,300 a kilowatt. And for a frame of reference, Vogtle will probably come in around 12 or 13,000 a kilowatt. But key to South Korea's success was picking one design and sticking to it and getting really good at building it over and over and over again. So it's important that we get to a critical mass of orders around each individual design, so it gives us time to come down the learning curve and deploy at scale. So on the next page, we've heard snippets of this, but the nuclear industry is stuck in a stalemate. Utilities and other potential customers, like tech companies and like industrials, recognize that they have a need for clean 24/7 power, and they're not even afraid of the capital cost. Utilities rarely have trouble getting access to capital, but they're afraid of the uncontrolled overrun risk, like at Vogtle, or of the costly project abandonment risk, like at VC Summer. So like David mentioned, utilities going in together in a consortium or a buying pool to create a critical mass around a single design could help smooth the cost curve and smooth the risk across multiple reactors. But to accelerate those commitments and to accelerate the order book, it may take interventions to help manage that completion risk. So one utility proposed the concept of overrun insurance to help provide a measure of cost certainty that utilities are looking for when they go to their CFOs, their boards, and their public service commissions for permission to build new nuclear. So in this example, let's say that a reactor is going to be $2 billion for 300 megawatts. That utility said they'd even pay for the first billion in overrun, and it would be possible for the government or a private insurer to cover even a portion of that extra overrun cost, so they have some measure of certainty that allows them to place those committed orders. Another piece is that the government, for instance, the Department of Defense, the Tennessee Valley Authority, could have a really big role in becoming an off-taker or an owner of new nuclear. Particularly in the coal to nuclear transition, the Department of Defense has a number of operating coal sites and may be a potential owner and operator of new nuclear, again, in the same way that the Navy has been operating small modular reactors since the 1950s. So getting new nuclear built is not a technology problem. As we've heard today, we have a range of proven and innovative reactor technologies, from Gen 3 light water reactors we've been operating for decades to Gen 4 reactors that provide a bunch of really exciting new benefits for industrial heat applications. But it will require us solving the customer and the credibility problems. So we need to get specific about the solutions that will provide confidence for signing contracts sooner. In this report, as Vanessa mentioned, these are living documents. So this is our first draft and our first iteration. It's really important that we get to more specific input from utilities and from other customers around what they will need to be successful. And in being private sector led and government enabled, we are looking to reflect back what private industry needs to deploy these technologies at scale. So we look forward to incorporating your input, and we really hope that you folks reach out with comments and with questions. We look forward to updating future versions of the report with your input and getting us closer on the path to 200 gigawatts of new nuclear by 2050. Thank you very much.